to order. I am going to note that I am off-site at a conference, so Michelle, be prepared if what happened in BHAB happens again. I got kicked out of my last our Behavioral Health Advisory Board meeting, and so hopefully I will not have that internet problem again. But Michelle is here as our vice chair should I have internet issues. All right, so Lily, can you do roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Allman?
Here.
Commissioner Antle?
Here.
Commissioner Barish?
Here.
Commissioner Ebiam?
Here.
Commissioner Muschetti?
Here.
Commissioner Rich?
Here.
Commissioner Riley?
Here.
And Chair Miller?
Here. All right, our first item is public expression on non-agendized items. Do we have any public expression? All right, I don't see any, so we will go to item 3A for a discussion of possible action regarding the resolution authorizing remote mental health treatment act citizens oversight committee meetings. Do we have any discussion on that? Any public comment or discussion on that? All right, do we have a motion?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none. Lily, can you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman?
Aye.
Commissioner Antle?
Aye.
Commissioner Barish?
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiam?
Yes.
Commissioner Muschetti?
Yes.
Commissioner Rich?
Yes.
Commissioner Riley?
Yes.
And Chair Miller?
Yes. All right, next we will move to item 3B, approval of the minutes from the September 28th regular meeting. Any comments on the minutes? Yes, Commissioner Riley.
Thank you. I apologize. I had two monitors a few minutes ago and now only one is working. So I'm kind of bouncing around here. I would like an addition to the minutes and which item was that? Sorry, now I'm down at the bottom. So the discussion about substance abuse disorder treatment, I would like the minutes to reflect that that was actually a two-part item, and prior to voting on specifically the Ford Street project, the committee, by committee consensus, it was affirmed that Measure B funds should be allocated to substance abuse disorder treatment. And that was not specific to any project, but simply an affirmation that Measure B funds should be used for that purpose. So I would like that to be reflected in the minutes, please.
We can make sure Lily makes that change. Any other comments? All right, any public comments or questions? All right, seeing none, do we have a motion?
I would move approval as amended.
I second.
Okay, any further comments? All right, seeing none, Lily, can you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman? Oh, I think I'll come back to him because I think he logged off but is trying to come back on. So Commissioner Antle?
Yes.
Commissioner Barish?
Oh. Yes.
Commissioner Ebiam?
Yes.
Commissioner Muschetti?
Yes.
Commissioner Rich?
Yes.
Commissioner Riley?
Yes.
Chair Miller?
Yes.
And then back to Commissioner Allman?
Yes.
All right, so we will move on to the item number 3C, the October 2022 Measure B financial report. And I think we have Mary Alice Williford here to give us an update on that report.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Mary Alice here with Deputy Director for Behavioral Health. I just have a couple items I want to note that are in the fiscal reports in front of you today. The 21-22 report, the revenue is final for that fiscal year. We received June's payment and the Q4 interest posted. There still probably might be some expenses coming in that came in after the department submitted our closeout and that aren't included in October's report. In addition, the prudent reserve transfer hasn't been included. And once the auditor completes closeout, then I'll submit a final report that will wrap up fiscal year 21-22. And then also for fiscal year 22-23, the sales tax revenue to date, we've received July's payment. So that's included in that report. I did not include the Nocton Lewis report for October because there hasn't been any new expenses. So I just figured not to duplicate the report from previous months. So if you have any questions regarding any of the reports in front of you, I'd be happy to answer those for you right now.
Any commissioner comments, questions? All right, seeing none. Any public comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to item 3D unless there's any other comments or questions before we do that. All right, so item 3D, update and discussion regarding Measure B items at the Board of Supervisors meeting. And the most recent item that went to the Board of Supervisors came from our last meeting regarding moving forward with an RFP for substance use disorders treatment services. So the board, it wasn't a complete approval yet. They are wanting to move forward with an RFP. They are wanting to see the RFP before we release it. So they want to see the final before we put it out for public bidding. We are in the process of making sure we have a stakeholder group. It really does have to be a stakeholder group that is not biased and not attached to any agency that might want to bid on the RFP. If somebody is on that committee that is attached to an agency, that agency would no longer have a right to put in a proposal. So really trying to get a neutral stakeholder group so that we're able to, all agencies that might want to or are interested are able to put a proposal in for those projects or that project. We also worked with NAMI to release a community survey, asking the community as a whole what they think the most important next facility needs to be in Mendocino County. Hopefully you guys have seen that. If you haven't, we'll make sure we get it out to this board, but we are trying to get it throughout the whole community to not only just get stakeholder feedback, but to really see what our community as a whole sees as the most pressing issues, especially when in regards to substance use. So that's the update I have from the Board of Supervisors. Is there any comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner Riley.
So I haven't seen the survey that you just discussed. And so I guess I'm curious about how it would be used. Is it intended to be used to help this committee make decisions? What does that look like?
The survey talks about what are the next important facilities in Mendocino County, right? So are there additional facilities or services that we need, and that they can pick two options. My hope is that one, from behavioral health perspective, is we're able to really see where the community thinks our most pressing issues are in building out our continuum of care. Also for this committee to get an idea of what the community as a whole sees are the most pressing issues for facilities, services, and then for the stakeholder group that will be developing the RFP to really see what is the community seeing the pressing needs are in our community.
I guess I have a little concern about that. We hired a professional to do a needs assessment based on the services that we currently have and actual factual data. We have a committee in place. We have an entire department with you at its helm. And so while I definitely think there's value in receiving community input, I guess I have concern about how it would be weighted towards decisions. And I think, my own personal experience when Measure B was before the voters was a large number of people that I interacted with were under the impression that this was somehow going to get all of the transients off the street and locked behind bars. I mean, there was just misunderstanding about what Measure B was even about or capable of. So I don't know if this should come back before this committee once you have those survey results, but I'm concerned about how the results might be used and how valuable they are or not.
So, and this committee does not have to use those. We will be using them in behavioral health anyways. It's part of a grant dollars we have. It's the state is asking every behavioral health to work on planning grants. And so whether or not Measure B chooses to use this the way we could use this, that'll be up to Measure B. But on behalf of behavioral health, we will be using it as we look for grants to augment our system of care. And it is part of what we're asked to do by the state of California. Commissioner Evian.
So I have just two things. One is I thought I understood you to say that the survey would be geared toward substance use as opposed to just being open-ended, like what are the pressing issues, which would be totally open-ended. But within the domain of substance use, what are the pressing issues? So that's my first question. And the second one is, can you give us a timeline at this point? Your best guess estimate of a timeline for this RFP?
So the timeline for the RFP, Sherry, I'm going to give you probably at least 60 days because we've got to get the stakeholder group together. We've got to write it. It's got to go back in front of the board. The board has to approve it before we get it submitted. So maybe we can do it quicker, but I don't want to mislead anyone on time. I'd rather say we'll probably need about 60 days. So hopefully we'll have it out. In regards to the survey is looking at all behavioral health facilities. That doesn't mean that we would prioritize mental health, but there's questions, even today on this agenda about a CSU, right? Does the community think we need one? I mean, that's a question that Kemper did put it in his report, but does the community think we need one, knowing we would probably run in arrears if we enact one, right? Is that a priority to our community? For me, this is, whether it's we're applying for grant funds or Measure B, they're community dollars. We should hear from our community. So you're going to have Measure B facility, you're going to have mental health facilities on there, and you're going to have a variety of substance use facilities. I would be pulling out substance use facilities to say, hey, this is what the community is thinking that our top substance use facilities are needs in this community. So it has a variety of different substance use facilities, but it has a couple of the mental health facilities we don't currently have in Mendocino County, such as the CSU, because it keeps coming up. I think that from behavioral health, whether Measure B uses it or not, we should know what our community is saying. Hey, if you're going to apply for grant funds, this is where we think what we need in this community.
Janine, can you hear me? It's Almond.
Yes.
So can I assume this survey is going to be countywide or in Ukiah? And when I ask countywide, okay, what do we mean countywide? Covelo and Walla?
Yeah, so we are taking it with us. We've been traveling throughout the community, doing events. So it's been at our community events. NAMI has been, it's on the Survey Monkey. So we have paper copies. We have it on Survey Monkey for people that can get it electronically. We also have a QR code. So people easily just snap it with their phone and link to it. There are PSAs coming out to all the newspapers. We're trying to get it through there. It's being blasted through different email and stakeholder groups. So we are actually trying to hit the whole community. So taking the survey paper form with us with the thing that shows the QR code, we really want it around all of Mendocino County. We don't want it Ukiah centric. It really is about hitting our whole community. And we've brought it over. It's been sent out to our Native Connection groups to get it within the tribal communities also.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other commissioner questions before I go to the community?
So the 60 days will be your estimate in terms of having a finished RFP to then send out for proposals.
Yes, getting it written, getting it approved by the board. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Any other commissioner questions? All right. Any public comments or questions? All right. Hearing none, we will move on to item 3E, which is an update and discussion regarding the status of current Measure B projects. You guys have that within your packets. So I'm not going to go through everything because it's there. I'm happy to answer questions you guys may have. The big things that I think are important that I'll just touch on really quick is the crisis respite in Fort Bragg is coming along. They've been able to get in and start doing reconstruction, so remodeling in there. So very excited that that is moving along, and we're really hopeful to see that opening soon. The PUC is still in, we're moving forward with the PUC every week. It feels like we're getting a little bit closer. We are trying to work with getting everything out of Whitmore Lane so that they can work on demolishing the building and moving forward with the rebuild. So there's a lot going on just within that. And we are hopeful to have a architectural design put together that you guys will be able to see soon, just to kind of show you where it's at and what it's projected to sort of look like. We are still moving forward with offices for NAMI at that facility. And so, and that's working within our budget and our plan. So that's really excited that NAMI will be able to have an office at that facility and work with both clients on the units, family members that are coming to visit, and then any individual who might need NAMI services. The NAMI board did present to their board to make sure that they are interested in an office at that site and would they be using it for their main office, and they were able to vote that they do support that. So that's all really exciting. We continue to do all the other services. Everything seems to continue to be moving along great with dual response and aftercare services. We did work with NAMI this in September, doing a lot of outreach for mental health and suicide prevention. And then we spent the month of October every Saturday traveling to 5 different locations. The last Saturday is this coming Saturday. We'll be in Willits, focusing on the overdoses in our community. And we bring a full group of people with different resources in our community and really pushing on how to get Narcan within our community. So part of that stigma education outreach that we're working with NAMI on, and really getting Narcan in a variety of individuals' hands some didn't know how to get it, some didn't even know what Narcan was. So we have been at 4 different locations for the month of October, and we'll be in Willits next Saturday. And I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have regarding our project updates. Yes, Commissioner Antle.
Chair Miller, I was wondering, under the Fort Bragg crisis respite, we're all having challenges filling positions, and here this is called out by RCS, and that they have a contingency plan. Not that I think we all need to see that, but perhaps you should see that, or it should be reviewed to make sure there is a viable plan.
I have not seen it, but I can definitely ask them for it and review it.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? All right, any public comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we will move on to item 3F, Discussion on possible action regarding annual maintenance costs, building life cycle costs, and capital facilities reserve for the Regional Training Center, the Crisis Residential Treatment Facility, and the Psychiatric Health Facility. And I am going to hand that over to Director Janelle Rao.
Good afternoon, Janelle Rao. I'm the General Services Agency Director. If you wouldn't mind also entering Doug Anderson and Dan Mazzani, thank you. I see them joining. They're just here as technical resources. Dan Mazzani is our Facilities and Fleet Division Manager, and then Doug Anderson is the Assistant Facilities and Fleet Division Manager who has oversight of capital projects. So as mentioned the last time that I was before you, which I think was in June or July, we talked about developing more of an estimate for the cost to operate each of the facilities that have been constructed or in construction right now, such as the POP, utilizing the Measure B funding. And we went ahead and developed an operational cost as well as a capitalized asset management, meaning for the life of each of those facilities, we worked on a 20-year kind of a life cycle replacement for the capitalized project needs, as well as your annual cost to operate just as a facility. And that's just by operating, I don't mean the services that under Dr. Miller and behavioral health. It's just to maintain that county facility, including utilities, landscaping, custodial services. So for each one of those, we developed kind of an estimate. It hasn't really been, it's not a formalized cost. It's more of a target for your consideration, and then also for our board once some sort of a recommendation comes forward from Measure B. As I referenced, we're working on this for every county-owned facility right now, we being the General Services Agency, as we're updating our 5-year CIP. So we started with the Measure B facilities as somewhat of a platform to use a little bit of a more refined model in estimating these. I didn't hand them out because they were really just a work in progress, but I'm more than happy to share the details so that you can look at what some of these cost estimates come out to be. So for each of the 3 facilities, you have the CRT, the soon-to-be POP, and again, that was just a real, they're estimates because we don't have a constructed facility yet, but we did work with our architects, and they assisted us with, based on the current design, what that might look like. So that's the CRT, the PUF, and then the training center in Redwood Valley. From an operational perspective, it's approximately $155,000 per year. That's total of the 3 buildings. So Redwood Valley is approximately $35,000. The psychiatric health facility, we're estimating it between $78,000 and $80,000. And then the CRT was an estimate of $42,000. And again, that's an annual cost to operate separate and aside from the services that are included in that. From a capitalized and a capital asset management perspective, over a 20-year period, for a total of the 3 buildings, we estimated $3 million. Sorry, I muted myself. We're looking at $553,000 for the CRT, the psychiatric health facility, a little over $2 million, and then the Redwood Valley Training Center, approximately $400,000. Numbers, are somewhat fluid. We built in escalators, and that's where I have Dan and Doug here in the 20-year cost of ownership model. So that included a 3% escalator per year. Of course, when you come into where, let's just say it's an HVAC system and you have a failure at year 5, you would again adjust your cost of ownership model based on the replacement and then the future life expectancy of that particular asset that's on the facility. So that's what we've come up with so far. We are more than happy to answer any questions. I want to note that with the CRT and the Redwood Valley Training Center, they're in their first true year of operation. So we'll be shoring this up as we know more about each of those facilities. And then again, once the psychiatric health facility is constructed and operational, we would again shore it up based on our known operational or the own needs of those facilities. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And then I also, as I mentioned, have Doug and Dan here if you have any technical questions.
Commissioner.
I have 2 questions. One, why is a 20-year life cycle replacement used as opposed to, let's say, a 30-year life cycle? replacement? That just because 20 years doesn't seem very long. So that maybe I'll just ask my second question after this.
I think, Doug, do you want to take that one? I saw you unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is Doug Anderson, the Assistant Facility Manager. 20 years is a typical life cycle cost of the internal systems, mechanical systems, a roof system. And actually, as we developed it, it comes out to about an average, but some of the systems are averaged over a longer period of time, depending on the type of asset. So it's actually a fairly complex model with, roofing. I think we have it at 30-year because we've specified a more, comprehensive long-term roof system at the CRT, for example, and also at the PUF. So we're anticipating a longer life cycle for a roof. Mechanical systems at 20 years. Some other systems, like a hot water heater, is 15 years. So, I mean, that's just that it's 20 is kind of an average, but each of the systems is designed around a particular life cycle cost for that type of system.
Thank you. So my other question is, you said regarding the capitalized costs. So I'm not sure how this works. You said it was around 3 million per year. So is the idea that this money should get socked away, for lack of a better word, about 3 million a year from Measure B funds should be earmarked for life cycle replacement? How does it work?
If I might, the 3 million is over the 20 years, not per year. It's not an annualized. The operational costs are annualized. So over a 20-year period, and Doug's team also went through and said, okay, because of the inflator that we did over that 20-year life cycle, as he mentioned, depending on whatever the asset is, if you did it right now, for example, the psychiatric health facility, we're estimating almost 2.1 million over 20 years. If you did them right now without the 3% escalator, it would be 1.4 million. So the cost will shift, and we'll also look at escalation as inflation and supply chain issues. We're trying to be as realistic as we can. Right now, our inflator rates are much higher than 3%. That's just being transparent. But I think for a 20-year look at these ownership for these buildings, I think that's fair and reasonable. And as Doug said, the 20-year is just a common average that's used.
So is the expectation that little over 3 million would be set aside from Measure B funds for this purpose?
I don't know that I'm the person to answer that question. Those are the estimates that we were asked to prepare. Where those funding come from, I think that's what the purpose of this discussion is. The county looks for cost of ownership and full cost allocation, so to speak. So, for example, if it's a state or federally owned building, we cost allocate the costs associated with maintenance and capitalized repairs and improvements to the programs. So under this particular model, and these buildings are assigned to behavioral health. And I know Dr. Miller cringes every time I say that, but when it comes down to full cost allocation, we allocate those costs to a particular program or service, and whether it's billable or not at the state or federal level. And then again, with Measure B. And I think that was the purpose for the discussion, was for planning purposes.
Okay. Thank you.
Other commissioner comments or questions? All right, public comment or questions? All right, it's back to the committee. Anything else that we want to discuss on this item? It is a discussion of possible action items, so I want to make sure I don't miss anything. All right, seeing none, yes, Commissioner Rich.
Perhaps I'm just unclear, but I'm not sure what action we would be asked to take at this time. If this is, I guess I'm just not clear about that.
I think the question that asked is sort of whether or not we as Measure B need to consider a capital facilities reserve. And we may not want to bring that back to our next meeting, but it is something the Board of Supervisors has brought up, which is why Director Rowell is here, is do we need a capital facilities reserve for Measure B to be able to maintain these buildings for 20 years plus? Director Rao.
Actually, I'll defer to the CEO.
Okay, Commissioner Antle.
So my question would be, if it's not Measure B, Janine, are you going to have money? Because, otherwise it's going to come back to general fund, and that's not likely an option. So if it's not Measure B, I don't know what mental health would have, or if you're expecting to be making any kind of revenue off of these to be able to take care of that cost in the long run.
No, so behavioral health would not have that if we do not have it through Measure B. I don't know where those costs will come. It would actually come from having to reduce client care overall. So we would be impacting your overall mental health client care by however much the cost is, because behavioral health does not have those funds to maintain the facilities also. There isn't going to be any revenue on these buildings. If we were to be generating a revenue, they would most likely be running in a hole, which means we'd be using Measure B treatment dollars to maintain them at a zero, kind of a zero budget. So there isn't going to be a revenue to maintain these facilities because the services are not going to cover themselves, right? So we're trying to make it so that the services do cover themselves, which means not creating a large rent to maintain the buildings. So it really is going to have to be a conversation on how Measure B maintains these facilities for the next 20 years.
Then I think we need to bring forward a CIP and a maintenance reserve account at the next meeting, if it's not clearly defined here today.
Commissioner Rich.
I would support that. It would also help me if I could actually see the numbers written out with some explanation as to how they were. I know we got it verbally, but I think it's important that it's clearly documented for the public and for the future board members who might want to look back and see how that decision was made. I just think it would be important to have.
We can certainly submit. Sorry, Janine, through you. We can certainly submit the draft working documents. Just as I mentioned, we will be storing them up. So it could be part of our quarterly process. Typically, we do a quarterly update of our CIP that we adopt every 5 years. We're at the tail end of that as a county. So we'll be presenting our board in 2023 the full CIP for the county. But I most certainly will, I'll send these off and maybe through Dr. Miller, and she can transmit them to you as a board in their draft capacity, but at least it gives you a point in time to refer back to. The only thing I would just, as a reference, every county building or every government building does have a cost, right? And from a deferred maintenance perspective, what we don't want is to get into the situation that the county is currently in. Prior boards had to make decisions, and we call it kicking the can down the road, but we're in a deferred maintenance capacity for some time. And what that does is it deteriorates your buildings. Right now, under your current operational model, if you have an HVAC system failure, there is a cost to repair that. That cost will be transmitted to behavioral health as the operating department, who will then have to cost to allocate it out. And under this capacity, it would typically be to Measure B. But that's just, kind of the theory we're working under right now.
Commissioner Riley.
You're muted.
Sorry, my computer is being super wonky today. This might be a question for Sherry. We have later on the agenda a discussion regarding the prudent reserve for Measure B. And so as we're having this conversation, it occurs to me that I'm not maybe clear on what that prudent reserve is for. Is it for capital expenses like this, or is it for overruns in operations? So was this part of the conversation that you have included in your item, Sherry, for later?
Yes, that was my main question. I mean,
Okay.
the dollar amount is one piece, but you know, what is it? What would the purpose of what is the intended purpose of the prudent reserve? Because the Kemper report makes really clear, they give a presentation about how that prudent reserve would be used and how it's determined as well. But I was waiting till we got to that. But the other thing is that in the financial plan, there is one of the things that has been included are annual, and I'm looking away because I'm looking at my my monitor, our annual ongoing costs after expected reimbursements. And there are some, and that's totaled up. And these numbers are, those numbers could be adjusted to include the numbers that we received today. But the budget does include, for like the behavioral health regional training center, it includes the current year plus 4 succeeding years of operational costs. That is already in the budget. So some of these operational costs are already included. There's nothing that was ever put in for capitalized costs. But yeah, I'm really pleased to hear this as a discussion piece today. I think it's important for planning purposes.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? All right, any public comments or questions? All right, so back to the commissioners. We will plan to bring something back in writing and possible for an action at our next meeting. Okay. All right, so that's what we will do with 3F. Before we move on to 3G, just really quick, we were really quick on the projects update, and one of our community members was going to just note that based on recent information, the Crisis Respite Center should be ready to go about December 1st. So they wanted to just let us know that the estimated completion and date and hopefully open date would be around December 1st. So I wanted to make sure I got that on before we move to our next agenda item.
And that's the coastal one you're talking about, right?
Yes, the coastal, yes, Fort Bragg.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, item 3G, discussion and possible action regarding the prudent reserve, and I will hand that over to Commissioner Evian.
Thank you. So in this item, this agenda item, I included 2 formats to calculate a prudent reserve, but one of them, the prudent reserve that I see that's being, the calculation for the prudent reserve that's being utilized for Measure B is very different than a prudent reserve for example, a school district. Because in a school district, they have a prudent reserve, a certain percent that's in their procedures. And at the end of the year, essentially, the prudent reserve is 0, and based on the budget for the following year, it gets reestablished. But there's nothing that's carried over from the prior year. And with Measure B, it's very different because it's based on the funds that are available at the end of each fiscal year. 6.85% of that is taken, and that's put into the prudent reserve. And so the following year, whatever's left over of available funds, another 6.85% is taken. So you could have 6.85% taken of available funds from the same funding source for a number of years because it just hasn't been spent yet. So that's one way to do it. In the Kemper report, which is really, really interesting, they just took a flat percent, and I don't know how they arrived at that. It was just a hair over 20% of all projected revenues. 20%. That's the prudent reserve. And the purpose of it was to essentially pay for years 6 through 10 when the amount of revenue that Measure B receives drops and wouldn't be enough to support the ongoing costs to continue programs. Or in this, what we heard today, other costs like capitalizations. So there's two separate issues that I see here. One is, what is the purpose of the prudent reserve? How is it intended to be used? And the second is what calculation, the 6.85 was approved by the Board of Supervisors under the format I explained earlier. Is that the intended calculation? Was that the intention for it to be done that way? So I'm going to stop there and just throw those questions out.
So I guess Donna and I would probably be, the prudent reserve, if you remember, there was a committee, ad hoc committee that was formed, and part of that ad hoc committee was to bring back a couple different things, and one of them was the prudent reserve. And so we brought back the recommendation for prudent reserve. I think we asked for a little bit more, and then during the meeting it was stated the county's average was 6.85, and so they decided to go with the committee decided to go with what the county was. I think we were asking for something a little higher. At the time, the prudent reserve, what we brought forward for the prudent reserve was to cover treatment services long-term, knowing that we know the psychiatric health facility is not going to be 100% covered. It's going to require Measure B dollars to operate. We've known that from day one. We also don't know if the crisis residential treatment will or will not be able to operate at a $0 amount. Will it be able to cover all of its costs? We're still this year is going to really tell us whether or not we're able to cover all costs or what that looks like long-term. And so when we brought a prudent reserve forward, that's why we brought it forward, was so that long-term, we didn't want to build a building and then not be, 4 years from now, not have the funds because we're not bringing enough in. And then how do we fund that loss for those facilities? So that was the reason we as a committee made the recommendation. And I don't know if Commissioner Muschetti has more things to add, but she was also part of that ad hoc.
We originally brought forth 15%. And then the CEO at that time, Miss Angelo, we went along with a bunch of discussion, and we decided finally to go with what the county does for their prudent reserve. So that's how we arrived at that figure, is what the county does for their prudent reserve.
Any commissioner comments, questions?
So
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sherry.
No, go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I think that the county's methodology of the prudent reserve is a fair pattern for us to follow. And as a person who, when we were initiating Measure B, one of the biggest concerns at that point was the roof of everything, because the roof in all county buildings, as Doug said earlier, 20 years is about it. And what we didn't want to do is spend all of our money at the end of at the end of the money collection say, all right, county, good luck, goodbye. You know, we built you these things. They certainly needed to have some kind of monies to continue on for unforeseen circumstances. So I believe that what we've done for a prudent reserve is exactly where we should be. And please remember, you and I, as commissioners, we can't spend a dime. It's all up to the Board of Supervisors. And I don't think there's any sense in making it any different than what, and then the board's going to make it different for us. I mean, they're going to stay right where they are. So this is it's an academic conversation, maybe a historical conversation of why we are where we are, but it's proven to be I think we took the right step on establishing a prudent reserve at the right rate that the board uses. And nobody has a crystal ball. I think that we're going to be, 10 years from now, people are going to be very satisfied and happy that we decided not to spend the money then and for them to spend it now on something they need. Thank you.
So, yeah, I in listening to the discussion and reading the Kemper report, it seems that the way the prudent reserve is being built it seems sound, as a sound way to go forward. What I would love to see as we approach the end of year 5 of the Measure B funding, I would love to see a financial plan or a budget for expected ongoing costs after reimbursement. So we have something to work from. And so those would be our expenses. What does our expected prudent reserve look like? And not just for program costs, but capitalization costs, operational costs. Put all of that in there, offset it with our projected revenues, and see what years 6 through 10. And the world's not going to end after year 10 either. So I think it's important to even think beyond year 10, realistically. But I would love to see a plan like that put together.
Other commissioner comments, questions? All right, any public comments or questions? All right, seeing none, it's back to the committee. Is there any other comments or an action item from this item?
This is Shannon. I feel like I would like to see the written detail about the ongoing capital expenses before we make kind of a final decision here. But could we continue this item until the next meeting, or maybe the meeting after that when we have additional information? Sounding like some of the expenses that Ms. Rao described may already be included in, or what's planned for in our existing prudent reserve, but we want to make sure that that's truly adequate.
So Shannon, are you then wanting, it sort of sounds like something similar to what Sherry is asking. We need something to show us what our expenses are over the next 10, 15, 20 years, so we can decide, do we need an additional reserve and what that looks like. So possibly coming back in December or the meeting after that with some more detailed what our projections are, knowing they're going to be estimates, but having some estimates. Okay.
I think one of the big unknowns, as I look at, I mean, in the ongoing costs that are included in the plan that I've looked at, it's a bit over $3 million, which was pretty close to what Kemper had said. That's before the capital costs today, although that only comes out to about $155,000 per year. So it's not over the top. And oh boy, I lost my train of thought. I don't know, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, Is there someone that would be tasked with putting this picture? I think of it as a picture, a budget picture or a plan together at the county.
So do you want to make a motion, Sherry, that making a motion that behavioral health work on a plan? Because we're going to be able to give, it will be a combo of behavioral health and facilities. Obviously, we're going to have what we project long-term operational cost, and facilities is going to have to do long-term facility cost. So if you want to ask the county departments to work together to put together a 10, 15, 20-year estimate, did you want to make a motion, something similar?
Yes, and I did remember what I was going to say. So out of this 3 million, 1.8 million of that are, and this is just a kind of a placeholder. I don't have anything to really to say it stands on a whole lot. Would be for the PUF. That's the big unknown. What are the expected ongoing costs for the PUF? But yes, I would love to make a motion that with the different county departments, a long-term plan for ongoing costs, program costs, operational costs, capitalization costs, all be included in there, be put together.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any other commissioner comments or questions? Any public comments or questions? All right, Lily, will you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman,
No.
Commissioner Antle,
Yes.
Commissioner Barish,
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiam,
Yes.
Commissioner Moschetti,
No.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. All right, so we will move on to our next item, which is 3H, discussion and possible action regarding establishment of a crisis stabilization unit. And Sherry, I believe that's your item also.
I just wondered where the discussion is about this. It's in the Kemper report, and in all the years that I've been either attending mostly as a public person, I never heard any discussion about it. So it's more out of curiosity that I would love to hear if what the intention might be regarding this.
All right, Commissioner Moschetti has her hand raised, so we'll start there.
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller. So National NAMI as a whole supports the CSU. However, NAMI local does not. It does not pay for itself. It's a beautiful idea. It's a wonderful part of the mental health continuum of care, but it is very expensive. First of all, we would need staffing, where it's hard to staff anything we have already. But secondly, to my understanding, and Dr. Miller can correct me if I'm wrong, but this has been for years, that you can keep a person for 23 hours and 59 minutes. You can only bill for 20. And of course, we're not going to let people go when they're not able to go. And so we have to provide 4 hours of care at no reimbursement cost. I personally, and I asked my board, we don't think that this county can support that. And I will leave it up to everyone else to make comments. But that's where NAMI Mendocino sits. It's a wonderful idea, but we just don't see how we can afford it or staff it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Ace, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I agree with that assessment. And then recognizing that their crisis stabilization unit in Sonoma County closed because of the same reason. I've also heard it said that the psychiatric health facility to some extent can make can take up the slack and, have one bed reserved for such a thing, or two beds to have short-term turnaround if somebody needs to be locked and observed. So you'd have a doubling of the staff and much cheaper administrative costs. But that just for what it can do, although there was some question, I remember it was in the legislature that it was going to be 72 hours instead of 24 hours. I don't know whatever happened with that. That's about the time we stopped talking about it. But just in terms of efficiency, my understanding was it wasn't worth the cost.
Commissioner Riley.
Yeah, I can't speak professionally to the merits of a crisis stabilization unit, but I can provide some context maybe for some of the newer committee members. The reason, one of the reasons it appears in the Kemper study is because RCS previously owned the property where the crisis residential treatment facility is right now. And their original proposal for that project, and this was prior to Measure B, was a combination crisis stabilization unit and crisis residential treatment facility. So when the subsequent transactions occurred and then the county took over the project, the CSU was dropped from the project. But the Kemper report was written during a time that the CSU was just an assumption that it was occurring. So that's just some historical context.
And
Commissioner Allman, go ahead.
One last thing of historical. It was talked about at the time that Adventist system was being involved, and they were talking about using one of their former surgical wings for it. So I think that we were all talking about it because we were all throwing things at the wall and see what was going to stick. And so while it is something that would be very beneficial to our population, it's correct. It's correct that the expense of this is going to be greatly outweighed by what we would be able to spend on the PUF and other units. So maybe it's in the future, but I do not see Measure B being able to fund a CSU.
Commissioner Rich.
So just to put the behavioral health perspective on, when we made our recommendations from the Kemper report in 2018, we did include the crisis stabilization unit, but it was contingent on it being a multiple use facility, as has already been mentioned, and pending legislation to extend the 72 hours. The current board has not discussed this, but I think that we would not be in support of a facility that doesn't cover its costs. So.
Commissioner Barash.
Oh, just one other historical interesting fact was that when RCS was talking about building the facility to house all three functions, the original or the idea was that they were going to rough in the crisis stabilization unit, not actually finish it until they saw what the costs were going to be, and so that was not going to be operational right away.
Yes, Sherry. You're on mute.
Is it realistic to think of what Ace had mentioned, that a PUF could take up the slack and a couple beds could be designated for those beds that might typically have been used in a CSU? Is that allowed? Is it?
Yeah, so legislation, so 5150, when you're placed on a 72-hour hold, it doesn't mean you're there for 72 hours, right? It's up to. So right. I know there's a philosophy, and sometimes people will say, oh, they didn't go for 72 hours, right? It says you can be held up to 72 hours. That means if you go in and you're stabilized in 20 hours, they can release you in 20 hours. And we have seen there are a couple PUFs across the state where they actually have a room that's used as a CSU. We need to have that conversation with telecare, but you don't want to create it into a CSU because then you have different standards, different staffing requirements. And there are some times where if you read the legislation, you can't cross over your staff in certain situations. And I think there is some thought that you can cross your staff and have some of these facilities operate, and that's not always the case in some of the different facilities. But yes, could they telecare? I mean, at any facility, it's not an automatic 72 hours. It's up to. So the moment you're stabilized, you're supposed to be released. And so really, if you have that continuum, which we would then have, right, you can go from the psychiatric health facility into your crisis residential treatment, which would be your step down into potential crisis respite, if that was needed. So the hope is that someone could go into the facility, be there 20 to 24 hours. You can bill for 72 hours, right? As long as they're acute, and then they have to go on to what's a 5250, and then a 5270. We don't know if we'll do 5270s in Mendocino County. That is a question for the Board of Supervisors to decide. It's a longer hold, but it's a board approved hold. The board has to initiate it in the county. So yes, they could go in for 24 hours, turn around and end up in your crisis residential treatment.
Great, thank you.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? All right, any public comments or questions? Seeing none, back to the committee. All right, I'm going to move on to the next item, which is 3I, discussion and possible action regarding recommendation, funding criteria, procedures for funding requests, and public transparency. And Commissioner Rich.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. So I brought this forward because I'm concerned that it's not clear how organizations or members of the public might bring projects forward. Right now, it seems that they need to be championed by a board member, and then it's considered, and or it's been described in the Kemper report or the measure itself. In the case of the PUF. But we have had several instances of other kinds of proposals coming in, the crisis residential treatment on the coast, and then the discussion last month regarding the Ford Street project were both projects that were brought to us for us to consider by committee members. And if that is the process, I think we need to have that clearly documented so that the public knows. And I think it would be beneficial to have some guidelines for what we do with those in terms of, are there types of projects we would want to consider in that format? Service projects like the CRT versus a facilities project. Are there certain dollar thresholds we would be willing to consider in that manner, as opposed to in a response to an RFP? And any other factors we might want to consider, like, does it align with the Kemper report? Is it in the measure? Is it meeting a need in an outlying area? There might be other things that would lead the committee to choose one way or the other on a funding recommendation. And right now, we don't have any of that documented. And my concern is then, there's a lack of transparency because we're each making our own decisions based on what seems right in the moment, based on our constituents that we're representing. But there's not any kind of system that we can then say, hey, yes, this clearly aligns. I'm going to choose this because of that. And I think it would behoove us to have that documented at that level. So it's sort of twofold. One, how do they get the requests in? If it really is the process, it has to go through a board or a commissioner. There's some concerns I have about that because then you have to know a commissioner and sort of be in the system, as it were. So I think that is a less transparent process. And then lastly, I think that we need to have some additional documents available on the website, most notably the rules of procedure that was created in 2018. I had asked for some bylaws or something when I got on the board. That's what I was presented, but it's not publicly available in a way that's accessible. I'm sure it's in some minutes somewhere. But I recommend that along with any kind of documents for procedures or evaluation criteria also be put on our website.
Commissioner, comments, questions?
Yeah, I'm going to comment, and with all due respect, Michelle, I appreciate what you're saying. However, when you say that the comments that you brought up are somewhere in the minutes, that's exactly the answer. When a citizen wants to address this commission, we gladly welcome them there and we listen to what they have to say. And the reason that we are representative of our own different stakeholders, there's 11 of us and we all represent different parts of the county. We know our circle of workers. You know, the NAMI people, I know the government people, the fire and police. And if somebody has an idea, they come to me and I bring it up. Right? We don't need to make a simple process complicated by having more forms and more regulations when somebody wants to bring up an idea. When somebody wants to bring up an idea, we champion them to come to the microphone, tell us what is going on, and then we as commissioners have the ability to reach out to that person and say, hey, listen, I really like what you were saying. Let's get together and make it an agenda item. And that's how the whole process works. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is working very well. If somebody says Measure B is not transparent, I would challenge them to show me any other commission in this county that is more transparent on the budgetary, on the minutes, on our meetings, everything. We are doing everything we can to get our information out. So while I can understand your idea, I've been on this commission since day one, and I have never heard anybody say, gosh, you're just not transparent enough. People have said, boy, you guys sure do give us a lot of information. Thank you.
Commissioner Riley.
Thank you. I have heard concerns about lack of transparency, and as I also work for the city of Ukiah, it's a concern that we in government hear a lot. Our information is not always accessible. It's not always easy to understand. And so I do support the recommendation to have additional documentation on the website. Anything that we can provide, we should. I guess my question for Commissioner Rich is if you have a proposed process or language, or if you're just seeking input from the committee at this time. I feel like there's some middle ground between a very strict formal bureaucratic process and what Commissioner Allman described, which could result in an unlimited number of requests and solicitations from people at our meetings, which may or may not have any support from the Kemper report, which we adopted as our strategic plan, for example. So I do think there should be some parameters. Having the endorsement or the support of a committee member is a process that the city of Ukiah uses for getting items on an agenda. So I don't know, I guess my question is, do you have some suggestions or parameters?
Yeah, so I think that some of it is just articulating the process we're already using. So if it is that this commission uses the commissioner champion system, as you will, then I think that needs to be clearly documented so that the public knows that's how you ask for requests from this committee. So that's sort of one. I don't think that's necessarily difficult. It's just clearly articulating what we do. So when one proposal gets brought forward, I hear about something else in the community that maybe didn't, I can say, hey, well, this is actually how you do it. So it's really just giving us a tool to respond. I don't think we need like a big formal process. I just think we need to have it be clear what we're doing. I do think it would behoove us to outline some very general characteristics of projects that we would be likely to support. So the ones that immediately came to mind is it part of the Kemper plan? Is it outlined in the measure? Does it, have support of, a commissioner? I also, I think both of the projects we've seen come forward also have support of a municipality and a service provider. So there's several pieces that came in with that. I think what wasn't clear is at what level do we make distinctions about RFP versus sole source provider? We just went with a sole source provider in the case of the crisis respite center. We didn't on the sober living facility. And I think that it makes good sense to do it at that amount, but we didn't have any clear guidance that, no, this would just be the way it needs to be, as opposed to us having to figure it out in the moment. I think it would just make that a little clearer. Like, yes, we can make this decision, or no, we need this to go through this process. And that could be a simple, like anything over $1 million, we have to do this process, and just having it articulated clearly, have it on the website so the public knows.
And if Alderman can weigh in one more time, these are all county policies. And so if that's the desire, then what we need to do is have Director Rowell give us that information, because we can't reinvent the wheel. We follow the county's guidelines. And so if our commission needs to know more on what the county government guidelines are, then that's the answer to your question, I believe. I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm just saying we've been down this road, and the county has worked very hard to make sure that there is clear direction on how this goes. And so if I would strongly recommend Janelle get us an information sheet, and so we know what the county does, because we don't want to do anything different than what the Board of Supervisors is already doing. Thank you.
Commissioner Ebion.
I just think listening to what Michelle is suggesting, it would, for just a person in the county to be able to, if they know that Measure B is the avenue through which their request is going to go, it would certainly be more direct to have that information associated with Measure B, instead of having to filter through the county documents. I'm not suggesting that the Measure B docs would be in conflict with that, but it would just certainly make it easier to access. That's all.
And it could be as easy as putting a link on our website that says we follow the county guidelines regarding, RFP and project requests, and linking to that, so the person coming to the site wouldn't have to do exactly what Sherry said.
And we don't need a motion for that. All we do is ask the county to do that, and they do that for us. It's very simple government. That's the way we work.
Commissioner Riley.
I assume that the county does have policies surrounding most of these things. That being said, I have not seen them. So I wonder if those could be provided for this committee to review, so that we could determine whether that addresses all of Commissioner Rich's concerns, or if perhaps we need to add anything specific to Measure B. So could we ask for staff to provide that at the next meeting?
And I think County Council Curtis has jumped on, so I'm going to let him speak.
Certainly we could provide the policies that the county does have. What I would say is, while we've got a lot of policies with respect to procurement and competitive processes generally, what we have not had has been, frankly, much of a track record as to grant programs. The process of giving away money is a bit different than the process of saying, we need to buy this thing, tell us how you can meet that need for whatever price. I don't know how much money there's going to be in the future, so I don't want to speak for CEO Antle in terms of what may be worth reviewing in terms of policies there. But if that is going to be a regular thing, frankly, that is an area that would help, is to clarify what processes for grants would look like as opposed to processes for requests for proposals, because I think there's been some differences there that have sometimes left staff struggling a little bit.
And to your knowledge, are there also existing policies for how an agenda item might be brought forth to the Board of Supervisors?
So there are some rules in the board's rules of procedures as to how they would bring forward items. There's also a process for submission to the clerk of the board by departments. I would say that it's going to vary from sort of body to body. So, for example, the Planning Commission is going to have a different set of rules than the Fish and Game Commission might have, or standing committees might have different rules than civil service. So, what may be useful on that front is if you think you need rules for this committee, to look at that. You can certainly look at the board as a model, but to look at what's going to work best for this particular entity.
I guess I would also just want to point out that there's not other, like the Kemper report, for example, is not on the Measure B website right now. And if that's a document we are basing our decisions off of, it should probably be publicly available. Again, you could go through various agenda minutes to find it, or we could just put it there so that it's easy for people to find.
Any other commissioner comments, questions? I see that we have a public comment or question. Lily, can you let Joe in?
Hi, Joe Bradley. I'm on the Behavioral Health Board. I know, and I do this a lot. I go back to experience. And when we were perceived not to be completely transparent on the Tourism Commission, people got their knickers in a knot. And we know what we're supposed to do with the Measure B dollars, but going forward, when we get the big stuff out of the way, if there's still money left and it isn't going to running these things, and people see free money and they ask for it, I think there should be, a way for them to ask for it that is a routine request, and whether it takes an RFP or just a questionnaire, whatever. And I know Tom is I know what Tom's thinking also, but I think going forward, because we knew what we were charged with Measure B, and we've done phenomenal, but there's now these gray areas that people are seeing money and going, oh, we can use it for this and we can use it for that. So I think there should be some direction for that. Thanks.
Other commissioner comments or questions? Other public comments or questions? All right, this is a discussion of possible action item. Is there an action? Is there a motion that someone wants to put forward, or?
I guess I would like to see the existing documents. And Tom says we don't need a motion to get things on the website. So if we could get Kemper report and the what was it? The rules for participation, I think is what it was called, or rules of procedure on the website. I think knowing what's already there would be helpful before we create something new.
Okay, so do you want to suggest this comes back to another meeting with all the documents?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Riley? You're on mute.
Sorry. I was just going to ask for clarification on all of the documents. Do we mean the rules, the procurement guidelines, as well as the processes that are in place for agenda items to be placed on the Board of Supervisors agenda? Okay, thank you. I would second that motion.
Okay, any other commissioner comments or questions? All right, we have a first and a second. Any public comments or questions? Lily, can you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman?
Sure.
Commissioner Antle?
Yeah.
Commissioner Barish?
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiom,
Yes.
Commissioner Moschetti,
Yes.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. All right, we will move on to item 3J, discussion of possible action regarding frequency of mental health treatment Act Citizens Oversight Committee meetings. And Commissioner Ebiom, I believe this is your item.
So when Measure B first started, it met on a monthly basis. And then I think it was maybe 2 years ago, max, it switched to a quarterly basis. And my own experience suggests that quarterly just feels like light years away to getting stuff done. So for example, it freed us up at the last meeting, not freed us up, but we needed that last meeting to talk about the funding request. We used the whole meeting. And I mean, we created a special meeting for this, but it just feels like there would be better oversight if we had it more frequently than quarterly. And I guess my suggestion would either be monthly or every other month.
Commissioner, comments, questions?
Yes. Oops, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Go ahead, Doc.
I agree. I think every other month would be preferable to quarterly. I think there's a lot to talk about and would be able to do it in a more relaxed manner with a little more currency.
Commissioner Allman?
Yeah, every other month certainly works. I was, I believe, one of the few that voted to not go to quarterly because we have a lot to do. And we know that the tax collection for the majority of our funds ends in April. However, we're always 2 to 3 months behind in getting it from the state. So at least we need to go every other month through next July so we can see the monies that are coming in and if we need to make any recommendations to the board. But after that, when it goes down to 1/8 of a cent and Measure B is collecting around 1.7, 1.8 million per year, I think that our need to meet there will be a reason for us to not meet as often. But right now we have some major decisions to make on the brick and mortar part of it. So I would certainly support every other month at the minimum. Thank you.
Commissioner Riley?
I too would support every other month. We have had to call a couple of special meetings, which has worked okay, but in terms of public notice and the public and the committee's ability to plan for meetings, it would be better to have a regular schedule and not have to schedule the special meetings. So I support the request.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Seeing none, any public comments or questions?
No, is public invited to be?
All right, I am not seeing any public comments or questions. So back to the committee.
Alman would like to make a motion that we meet every other month, starting in, we want to start first of the year because we have 2 more months for the rest of the year. We have a meeting scheduled for December. And then if we go every other month, we could do December and then February, which is no problem. So I would say starting in December that we do every other month.
I second.
All right. Any committee comments or questions? Any public?
We have, assuming the motion passes, could we have could we agendize at our next meeting the calendar for next year so that we can consider those dates in advance?
Yep.
Right. Public comment or questions? All right, we have a first and a second. Lily, can you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Ansel,
Yes.
Commissioner Barish,
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiam,
Yes.
Commissioner Muschetti,
Yes.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. All right, so that passes, and we will make sure we prepare a calendar for the December meeting to look at the dates for next calendar year. We're on our last item, which is committee member reports regarding items of general interest. Lily, will you do that roll call?
Commissioner Allman,
Well, I don't have any specific points of interest for me in my last month. I would like to make sure that we're all aware that Governor Newsom has allocated, what in his words, not mine, over $1 billion for local county mental health. And when we were collecting signatures for Measure B, Measure AG and AH and Measure B, one of the things that was a selling point to the citizens is that the monies that we would get from Measure B could be used for matching money for grants that would come from the state or federal government. And I'm hoping that people are aware of that, and those who look for grants and see anything that would benefit our citizens coming from the governor's office would let Measure B committee know about it, so we can use our funds for matching money, because that would be the easiest thing for the Board of Supervisors to do, and we certainly would get the biggest bang for the buck. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Ansel,
Yes. Nothing to report.
Commissioner Barish,
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Ebiam,
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Muschetti,
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Rich,
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Riley,
No report.
and Chair Miller.
Just really quick, I will just comment on grants. As you guys know, because we responded to the grand jury, we have been applying for all grants that we can, which is why we were able to get an augment to the dual response. We got a grant awarded for crisis response, so we're able to augment and not use all the Measure B funds that may have been projected, because we are using grant funds first. We also are applying for a round 5 grant that our request will actually be to fund a portion. We're looking at possibly half of the psychiatric health facility. We don't know that we will get awarded that grant, but that is the grant we're writing today. It's due in November, and we are going to ask for half the funding and hope we get it. We'll be happy if we get any, but we're going to ask for half the funding. We of course we don't know if we'll get awarded, but we are going to be applying for that. So.
Wow. Great.
And I think that is it. We are good unless there's anything else anyone needs to add. And with that, we will end the meeting at 3:00. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.